Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're the place you come to, cut through all the noise and get straight to the insights that actually matter.
That's the goal.
And today, we're going to tackle something I think a lot of us, myself included, probably just accept as true. It's this idea that the really great companies, they can outlive their founders, right? They adapt, they keep innovating for, decades, maybe even centuries.
Mm-hmm. It's a comforting thought, isn't it? You see these huge legacies, these brands that have been around forever, and you just assume success creates this unstoppable momentum.
Exactly. It feels like a given.
Yeah.
A kind of conventional wisdom that's just solid, unshakable.
Yeah. You look at companies that have survived wars, depressions, massive technological shifts. It definitely reinforces that idea. Longevity feels like the natural endpoint of success.
But what if that very idea, that bedrock belief, is being challenged right now? Like, really challenged by one of the biggest names out there.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Where are we going with this?
This is where our guide for today's deep dives comes in. Mooky Tenenbaum. We're digging into a really fascinating and honestly pretty brutal discussion he had. It was on his YouTube channel, Intelligentsia Artificial, Perspectivas Financieras.
Tenenbaum. He definitely has some strong perspectives, especially on tech and finance.
He does. And in this talk, he laid out some incredibly compelling arguments. His interviewer, Claudio Suchavicki, who's known for being sharp, said Tenenbaum basically just dismantled that whole idea of corporate resilience, specifically using Apple as the prime example.
Wow. So Apple, the company everyone points to as the model for surviving post-founder.
That's the one. So our mission today is really to unpack Tenenbaum's thinking here. We're going to dive into his arguments, drawing straight from that conversation about why Apple might be facing, an existential threat in this age of AI.
Okay, so we're looking at his take on their innovation, or lack thereof, maybe their culture, strategic moves, or missteps.
Exactly. What he sees as the crucial mistakes they've made that are now kind of coming back to bite them, and what this could mean not just for Apple, but, for the future of tech and how we interact with it.
All right, sounds like a proper deep dive. Let's get into it. Where does Tenenbaum start dismantling this idea of Apple's post-job success?
He goes right for the heart of it. That commonly held belief we talked about, that Apple navigated the post-Steve Jobs era brilliantly, kept its edge, stayed the market leader.
Right. For many people, Apple's continued success, all the new iPhones, the profits, it was the proof that a visionary founder wasn't irreplaceable, that the company itself was resilient.
That's the paradigm. And Tenenbaum, according to the interview, just took it apart. His core idea is pretty audacious, actually.
Which is?
He argues that all that post-Jobs momentum, it wasn't sustainable innovation. It was, in his view, more like inertia. He uses this phrase, every moving thing has momentum.
Okay, so Apple had momentum from the Jobs era. The products, the brand loyalty, the ecosystem.
Exactly. All that carried them forward for a while. But Tenenbaum's point is that eventually that momentum ran out because Apple fundamentally stopped innovating.
Stopped innovating. That's a strong claim against Apple. He doesn't mean they stopped releasing products, obviously.
No, not iterating. He means innovating, creating genuinely new, paradigm-shifting things. He feels they just stopped, especially when it came to grappling with the big shifts, like AI.
So the continued updates, the new cameras, faster chips, he sees that as just polishing the existing model, like coasting, as you said earlier.
Precisely, like a car coasting on an old engine's momentum. It looked like it's moving fine, but eventually it's going to slow down and stop if there's no new power.
Okay, but many listeners might push back there. They'd say, my new iPhone is way better than my old one. Apple is innovating. How does Tenenbaum counter that specific point?
He uses a really relatable anecdote. He talks about having an iPhone 14, his son having a 16, and his wife having an older one, maybe a 7 or 9. And he says the difference between them was minimal, almost no innovation. Sure, incremental improvements, camera, speed, maybe the screen, but the fundamental way you use the phone, the core experience.
It hasn't really changed much in years. That's his point.
Exactly. It's the same basic interaction model we've had since the early days, just shinier and faster.
And I have to admit, thinking about my own phone upgrades, yeah, they're better, faster, the camera's nicer, but it doesn't feel like it changes how I do things in the way the first smartphone did.
Right. It's refinement, not revolution. And Tenenbaum acknowledges, look, not every company needs constant revolution. He mentions some car brands, right? They build on reliability, comfort. They don't have to reinvent the car every year.
But Apple isn't just any company. Their whole identity is built on being the innovator, the ones setting the trends, pushing boundaries.
That's his crucial point. For Apple, stagnation, especially when something as huge as AI is emerging, is critical. It's dangerous. They were supposed to be leading this, not playing catch-up or just polishing the old model.
Which leads into his next point, which sounds pretty damning. Apple's stance on AI itself.
Yeah, he doesn't hold back here. He says they either ignored AI,
Which seems unlikely for Apple.
right, or, and he thinks this is more likely, they simply lack the capacity to generate artificial intelligence that works for the iPhone.
Wow. Lacked the capacity. That's a huge statement about a company with their resources.
It is. Think about how central the iPhone is. Tenenbaum jokes, but it's true for many. I live there, I live in the iPhone. It's always with us, our primary interface to the digital world.
So for Apple not to integrate cutting-edge AI seamlessly into that core device, it feels like a massive failure to meet expectations.
That's exactly how Tenenbaum frames it. He talks about the not minor embarrassment of Apple's unfulfilled AI promises. Think about Siri.
Oh yeah, Siri. Huge fanfare when it launched. Seemed like the future.
But it kind of stalled, didn't it? It never really became the proactive, intelligent assistant people hoped for. And Tenenbaum uses Siri stagnation as prime evidence for his claim that Apple stopped innovating after Jobs.
Okay, so the innovation engine cooled down, but what about Apple's massive war chest? Can they just buy their way into AI, acquire the talent, the tech? That's the other common belief Tenenbaum tackles, right?
Absolutely. That idea that Apple's billions make them invincible, that they can just acquire whatever they need.
It's a powerful narrative. Money solves all problems in tech, supposedly.
But Tenenbaum points out that their attempts to, quote, buy talent or management, specifically from Google in the AI field, they did not succeed.
Really? Despite offering top dollar, presumably.
Apparently so. Which suggests to him it's not just about money. There's something deeper, something cultural within Apple that prevents them from just buying their way out of this problem.
And that something deeper is his core argument about their culture.
Exactly. He identifies this powerful, almost overriding belief inside Apple. Things have to come out of Apple, this internal in-house philosophy.
The not invented here syndrome, but maybe even stronger. A sense of pride that only Apple can create things worthy of the Apple brand.
That seems to be his take. And he contrasts this sharply with competitors. Look at Google's constant acquisitions, or Meta. He makes the point that WhatsApp is bigger than Meta in terms of user engagement, highlighting how crucial that acquisition was.
Right. Those companies weren't afraid to buy massive, successful platforms and integrate them, prioritizing speed and market reach over everything originating internally.
But Tenenbaum argues Apple's culture makes that incredibly difficult. Even if they do acquire a company or bring in outside talent, say a large number of people, it clashes with the existing corporate culture. There's resistance from people internally.
An organizational immune system rejecting the foreign body.
Sort of. It's hard to integrate outside ways of thinking, outside tech, when the internal culture is so strong and maybe resistant to change. He mentions Microsoft buying Skype, which didn't really achieve its strategic goals, as an example of how acquisitions aren't a guaranteed fix, especially with culture clash.
And this resistance isn't just about integrating outsiders, is it? Tenenbaum suggests there's actual fear within Apple about AI itself.
Yeah, this is a fascinating psychological point he makes. He posits there's a real concern among employees that developing powerful AI could make their own jobs redundant.
They won't need me anymore. If you're an engineer perfecting individual apps, an AI promises a single agent to rule them all.
Exactly. That vision of an AI agent replacing dozens, maybe hundreds of apps, that's all contrary to what Apple is. Remember, the iPhone is their baby. The App Store, the whole ecosystem built around discrete apps, that's their golden goose.
So a powerful AI agent fundamentally undermines their entire current model. It's a threat not just to market share, but to the very structure of their business and the roles within it.
Which might explain why Siri, their initial AI play, never really evolved. Tenenbaum sees it as that false dawn. It looked like AI, but was really just voice recognition and nothing else. Didn't get smarter, didn't become proactive.
More evidence, in his view, of the innovation stall post-Jobs.
Right. And all of this, the stalled innovation, the cultural resistance, the potentially self-sabotaging fear, leads Tenenbaum to a really stark conclusion.
Which is where he talks about decline.
Yes. He sees this failure on AI not just as a setback, but as the beginning of a decline that I don't know if they can stop.
Wow. Unstoppable decline.
And crucially, he stresses that money isn't the deciding factor here. Money doesn't matter, he says. He draws parallels to Intel missing mobile or Cisco struggling with the cloud.
Both giants with enormous resources who still stumbled badly when the tech landscape shifted under them.
Exactly. Having billions in the bank doesn't guarantee you'll make the right strategic bets or overcome internal inertia. You need the vision, the agility, the will to change. And Tenenbaum argues Apple hasn't shown that regarding AI.
So, if the internal culture is a barrier and Siri was a dead end, how does Tenenbaum see Apple positioned against this AI agent revolution he anticipates? He argues this wasn't a surprise attack, right?
Not at all. He's very clear. This AI wave didn't start 2 years ago. He says the potential was visible, anticipated as far back as 2003.
2 decades. So Apple had plenty of time to see this coming.
Which is why Tenenbaum uses words like arrogance, hubris, conservative to describe their posture. They were perfectly positioned, the ecosystem, the users, the cash, to lead this. But they didn't.
Complacency born from success? Or just too rigid to pivot?
Maybe a bit of both. This conservative in-house approach circles back to acquisitions again. Tenenbaum is really skeptical about any rumors of Apple trying to buy, say, OpenAI or Anthropic.
Why? Because Apple couldn't integrate them, or because the AI companies wouldn't sell?
More the latter, combined with the former. He believes it won't work because these leading AI firms are not in the business of diluting themselves inside a legacy giant. They want to be the next platform, not just a feature within Apple's existing one.
And Apple's problem is they have to dilute their current model to embrace AI fully.
That's the crux of it. Apple would have to dilute the iPhone app model. They'd need to fundamentally change their core product and business. That's incredibly hard for a successful incumbent to do. Disrupting yourself is tough.
So these AI startups are building the future, and they don't want to be tied to what Tenenbaum sees as the past.
Pretty much. Which leads to his really dramatic prediction about the future of the phone itself.
Okay, lay it on me.
He says, flat out, everything you have on the iPhone today has a very short life.
Whoa.
He predicts the next phone will be the phone with an agent. Probably from Google, Meta, maybe Grok, the companies building the underlying large language models.
So the device becomes a vessel for the AI agent rather than a collection of apps.
Exactly. Which means the iPhone, as we know it, with the functions we know, is dead. The trajectory is set, even if it takes a few years.
That's a massive claim. How does he illustrate that?
He uses a brilliant analogy. He says Apple's current strategy, adding features, refining the design, is like renewing, adding, enlarging a market for a diligence.
A horse-drawn carriage.
Right. They're making the best possible horse-drawn carriage, making it faster, more comfortable, just as the automobile is about to be invented.
And no matter how good the carriage is,
it can't compete with a car. It's a different category of technology. That's Apple's situation, in his view. They're perfecting a model that's about to become obsolete.
So polishing the past while the future arrives, that paints a stark picture of impending decline.
It does. And Tenenbaum argues this isn't just about Apple. This AI agent revolution will send shockwaves through huge parts of the digital economy.
Right, the ripple effect. He has a specific number, doesn't he?
He does. He predicts 70% of companies that differentiate themselves by an app are going to have a hard time. 70%.
It's huge. Think of all the businesses built around a slick app interface.
And he names names. Companies like Despegar, the Latin American travel giant, or Booking.com. Their whole value is in that app, experience searching, comparing, booking flights and hotels.
But with an agent.
You just tell the agent what you want. Book me a trip to Paris next month, best flights, nice hotel near the Eiffel Tower, use my points. The agent does the work behind the scenes. You never open the booking app.
So the app, the interface they spent billions on, becomes irrelevant. He says they're finished.
That's his word. Maybe not literally bankrupt tomorrow, but their core differentiator, their moat, disappears. Why use their app when the agent handles it all?
And it's not just consumer apps, right? He mentioned others.
Yeah, even something like Python, the programming language. If AI can write, debug, optimize code from simple prompts.
The role of the human coder changes dramatically.
Right. He also points to companies like Globee and Infosys, saying they've already disappeared completely because their models couldn't adapt to previous tech shifts. It shows this disruption is real and ongoing.
Even big enterprise players like Salesforce, he thinks they might struggle, even with their own AI.
He suggests they might not resist because the fundamental interaction model shifts away from needing their complex interfaces if the agent can handle the tasks.
So the core change is this move away from juggling dozens of apps
to interacting with just one agent, one person you talk to. That's Tenenbaum's vision. No more needing 150 apps or even the 1820 he says he uses regularly. just the agent.
And the communication example he gives is fascinating.
It really is. You don't choose Zoom or WhatsApp. You tell the agent, I want to talk to Sucho in the best way possible.
And the agent figures it out. Video, text, best platform, privacy settings.
Exactly. It handles all that complexity, which means, profoundly, that apps will no longer need to be beautiful, comfortable, or ergonomic.
Because you, the user, don't touch them directly. The agent does.
Wow. The focus shifts entirely from UI design to back-end functionality and API access for the agent.
Precisely. But then Tenenbaum takes this fascinating side road, talking about AI agents and fake news.
Ah, yes, the information landscape. This is critical.
He talks about testing ChatGPT himself to spot fake news, and his verdict was, perfect. Perfect. He thinks the AI is far better at verification than humans are. We make infinitely more mistakes, he says.
And the filtering aspect. Right. The ability to tell your agent, don't show me news about X or filter out anything about Y politician. Imagine a personalized, verified news feed curated by AI.
Which leads to his really provocative question.
Right.
If AI can verify and filter so well, what happens to fake news? Its whole purpose is to influence people.
If the agent stands between the misinformation and the user, verifying or filtering it out, Tenenbaum suggests what we say will matter less and less. Public discourse, online arguments, maybe even propaganda. Their impact could be massively diluted.
And this extends to things like investing, too.
He thinks so. He predicts maybe only 2% of people will decide themselves on investments. The rest will leave it to the agent.
The agent knows your goals, risk tolerance, maybe even ethical preferences, and just handles it. Removes the emotion, the bias.
Potentially making decisions far more rational, but also maybe removing a layer of human agency that some people value. It's a complex trade-off.
Okay, so beyond the tech and market shifts, Tenenbaum also points fingers at Apple's specific operational and geopolitical decisions, right? Like the move to India.
Yeah, he sees this as a major blunder, symptomatic of Apple living in a closed world of fantasy. They decided to move iPhone manufacturing from China to India, partly for geopolitical diversification.
Which sounds sensible on the surface, reducing reliance on China.
But the execution, according to Tenenbaum, was clumsy. They built the factories in India, then realized they needed experienced Chinese workers to actually run them efficiently, so they brought them over.
Okay.
Then China reportedly ordered those workers back home, leaving Apple without anyone qualified to run these massive, complex Indian facilities properly.
Ouch. So the geopolitical move backfired because they didn't grasp the practicalities.
That's Tenenbaum's interpretation. He sees it as Apple living in history, like a bureaucracy living on past glory, detached from the realities on the ground. They made a strategic move without fully understanding the operational or human consequences.
And this detachment, this sense of living in their own world, makes their existing advantages fragile, like CarPlay.
Exactly. CarPlay gives them a near monopoly of users inside many cars now. But he argues that won't last. Chinese cars, for example, are advancing fast and will likely use Android or other AI-driven systems, not just Apple's interface.
And he stresses again, this isn't just Apple versus Android anymore.
Right, this is Apple against AI. It's about adapting to the agent-based future, not just competing with another OS.
And internally, this is compounded by that resistance you mentioned, the complacency.
Yes, the people who are not interested, the ones who believe their own hype. That internal culture makes adaptation hard. Plus, the China situation remains a huge vulnerability. China is a great customer.
They could just turn off the tap, stop Apple sales.
Potentially. It gives China enormous leverage, a threat Apple constantly lives under, unlike maybe some other tech giants less reliant on direct consumer sales in China.
So if they can't innovate with AI and their current model becomes obsolete, what happens? A price war.
Tenenbaum predicts they'll have to lower and lower and lower the price of existing iPhones just to stay in the game. But even that's futile, ultimately.
Because the horse carriage, no matter how cheap, can't compete with the car.
Precisely. Yeah. Once the true AI agent phone arrives, the current iPhone becomes irrelevant at almost any price.
Is there any external sign of this? Any indicator that partners see the writing on the wall?
He points to Foxconn, Apple's main manufacturer, crucial to their whole operation, like TSMC is to NVIDIA.
What about Foxconn?
Tenenbaum notes, Foxconn is now making self-driving cars, diversifying significantly away from just assembling Apple products.
That is telling. A key partner hedging their bets.
That's how Tenenbaum reads it. They realize this is going nowhere, referring to Apple's current trajectory. He says, when you see others running away, especially your closest partners, that's pretty strong evidence of deep trouble.
It's like a vote of no confidence from the factory floor almost.
Yeah. Which brings us to Tenenbaum's final blunt assessment of Apple in the AI race.
Let me guess. He doesn't think they can catch up.
He's much more definitive than that. He says Apple didn't arrive at AI, full stop, and I don't think it will arrive. In his view, they already lost.
Already lost. Not losing, but lost. That's incredibly stark.
It is. And he finds Apple's public attempts to explain their AI position unconvincing, to say the least. He describes watching interviews with Apple engineers and finding their defenses pathetic and nonsense.
Suggesting they don't even grasp the problem internally.
That's the implication. They have no idea what they are doing, is his assessment. A fundamental disconnect between the threat and the internal response.
So Apple isn't just a competitor who might fade.
No. Tenenbaum clarifies they will eventually be a victim of AI. The AI agent isn't just competition. It's an existential threat that renders their core product obsolete.
And we're already seeing signs in their market position.
Clearly. Once the world's most valuable company, now third behind NVIDIA and Microsoft. NVIDIA, riding the AI wave, is soaring. Tenenbaum predicts Apple will slide further. Within a year, it'll be 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th.
So not an overnight collapse, but a gradual withering.
Exactly. The business won't vanish like some industries did, but it will wither over the years, losing its strategic importance, its premium status, its relevance.
And the pace of AI development just speeds this up.
Massively. He stresses AI has already accelerated more than last time we spoke. He gives examples like AI designing antibodies in minutes instead of years.
Incredible progress.
Which means Apple's decline isn't on a fixed timeline. The faster AI advances, the faster Apple's current model becomes the horse-drawn carriage.
And underpinning all this is a leadership issue.
A critical one, in Tenenbaum's view. The management factor. He uses that metaphor. The driver of the locomotive is no longer there.
Meaning no visionary leader like Jobs?
Right. He feels the current leadership is just changing the kiosk at the station, incremental tweaks instead of laying new tracks, inventing new forms of transport. They lack the ideologist, the risk-taker Apple hasn't had, he argues, for 10 years.
Wow. But there's one more specific, immediate threat he mentioned, right? The lawsuit.
Yes, the Apple Intelligence lawsuit. This could be a very concrete, very damaging problem.
What's the issue there?
Tenenbaum calls it deceptive advertising. Apple heavily marketed Apple Intelligence as a feature for iPhone 15 and 16, but it wasn't actually delivered. He shares the anecdote of the interviewer's wife buying an iPhone 16, expecting it, finding nothing. Quote, "It never arrived."
So they sold phones based on a promise of AI features that didn't materialize.
That's the claim. And Tenenbaum argues if Apple loses this lawsuit, the consequences could be severe. Not just fines, but potentially having to refund all sales for those models.
All sales, that would be astronomical. A huge hole in their finances, as he put it.
Exactly. And he differentiates this from, say, Google's antitrust suits. Those are often against governments or competitors. This lawsuit is against people, real customers, identifiable victims who feel misled. And people are angry.
Because Apple explicitly leveraged the success of AI to cell phones without delivering. That feels different, more personal.
It does. It could damage trust and significantly deplete their capital, making any attempt to catch up in AR even harder.
Wow. Okay. That is a lot to take in. A really comprehensive and frankly quite devastating critique from Tenenbaum.
It really is. So just to quickly recap his main points from this deep dive, we heard Tenenbaum argue Apple's innovation stalled post-Jobs, becoming just iteration. Their in-house culture created barriers to adopting AI. Siri was a false start.
Then there's the coming AI agent revolution threatening the entire app-based model, not just for Apple, but for potentially 70% of app-focused companies.
Right, compounded by geopolitical mistakes like the India manufacturing situation, deep internal resistance, and potentially a lack of visionary leadership.
And finally, the concrete threats like declining market value and that potentially massive Apple Intelligence lawsuit. It paints a picture of a giant truly at a crossroads.
It absolutely does. And understanding Tenenbaum's perspective gives you, our listener, a real shortcut to being informed. Not just about Apple, but about these huge shifts in tech, about corporate adaptability, about what happens when giants maybe miss the next big wave.
It's a case study in disruption, playing out in real time with one of the biggest companies on Earth. It definitely makes you think differently about market dominance and innovation.
It really does. Which leads us to that final provocative thought for you to chew on after this deep dive wraps up.
Let's hear it.
If a titan like Apple, with all its resources, its brand loyalty, its history, If they can potentially miss a critical tech shift like AI and face this kind of challenge, what does that say about other unshakable beliefs we hold? What other seemingly invincible companies might actually be closer to obsolescence than we think because of AI or maybe some other force we don't even see clearly yet?
That's a powerful question. And what does it mean for us individually? How should we approach information, investments, even just our own tech choices, knowing how quickly the ground can shift under even the biggest players? Do we stick with the polished, familiar diligence, or do we start looking seriously at the early, maybe clunky automobiles because they represent the future?
Something to definitely mull over. It certainly changes how you view the tech landscape. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
See you next time.